She thought she was buying a piece of nostalgia, a rundown drive-in theater for just $12,000 and a shot at rebuilding something from her childhood. But when Ellie Vaughn pried open a warped steel hatch under the cracked projection lot, she didn't find film reels or power cables. She found silence, dust, and gold. What started as a mechanic's side project became a national mystery, a legacy hunt, and the biggest decision of her life. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and if stories of hidden pasts, unexpected fortune, and the kind of grit that changes lives speak to you, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's episode? It might just rewrite history. The listing had been online for 6 months. No photos, no inspection clause, just a line of bold text reading, Historic Drive, in theater, AS. Buyer assumes all liability. No questions. Most people assumed it was a scam. Ellie Vaughn saw it as a second chance. She stood now at the cracked edge of the Starlight Drive-In lot, the setting sun throwing amber light across weeds, rusted-out speaker poles, and the rotting remains of concession carts. The main screen leaned like a sail in the wind, metal supports bent and half sunk in concrete. Vines clung to the base like nature was trying to drag the whole place underground. But to Ellie, it still looked like magic. She remembered coming here once as a kid. Her dad's truck bed was piled with blankets, and the speaker barely worked, so he mimicked the actors until she giggled herself to sleep. That night stuck with her, long after he left. Long after the house got sold and the shop shut down. And now, years later, she stood in the same lot, keys in hand, the deed folded in her back pocket, and not a single person around to see her reclaim it. She exhaled slowly, the air smelling like dust, dry leaves, and the faint tang of old oil. Her boots crunched against broken glass as she walked toward the projection booth. It was a concrete box, windowless, with rust-stained walls and a dented door that had to be shoulder-slammed open. Inside was darkness and silence, disturbed only by the flick of her flashlight beam. Empty shelves, a shattered reel, rat nests in the corners, the kind of place hope usually didn't grow. Still, Ellie had plans. She wasn't here to restore movies. She wanted to turn the booth into a repair bay, use the lot to host car restoration workshops, make it something weird and new, something entirely hers. She could see it all. Vintage neon, project cars lit under string lights, maybe even community movie nights in the summer. It was a long shot, but so was everything she'd ever done. She set her toolbox down and started clearing the room. There was a locked panel in the floor near the rear wall. Probably electrical access, she thought. She tapped it with the rubber grip of her wrench. It rang. Not like metal, not like wood. Hollow. She knelt, brushing away a thick layer of dirt and debris. The panel was steel, welded into concrete, with a sealed edge and a corroded lock assembly marked with 5 tiny dials. No label, no instructions. Just a faint stamp near the hinge. Property of U.S. Office of Emergency Preparedness, 1960. 1. She leaned back, heart ticking a little faster than usual. Wasn't expecting that, she murmured. Outside, the wind rustled the weeds. The sun dipped lower, painting the lot in gold and shadow. Ellie ran her fingers over the lock dials, not turning them. Not yet. She stood up slowly and dusted off her jeans. She'd come here to rebuild an old dream, but something told her this place had its own, and it had just noticed she was back. Ellie didn't sleep much that night. She spent the evening in the back of her old truck, a faded canvas tarp thrown over the bed, watching the stars above the collapsed movie screen. The hum of insects filled the dark, and every so often, the wind stirred the vines climbing the marquee like they were trying to whisper something back. She'd stared at the panel photo she took on her phone at least a dozen times, zooming in on the government stamp, the lock, the faint discoloration around the steel edges. Something was down there, and it didn't belong in an old drive-in. By morning, she was back inside the projection booth, flashlight wedged under one arm, hands deep in a rusted fuse cabinet. Most of the wiring had long since rotted away or been chewed through. But near the baseboard, tucked behind a sagging junction box, she found a second panel newer than the rest, painted matte black. No manufacturer label, just a vertical row of red switches under a cracked sheet of dusty plexiglass. The switches weren't wired to anything in the booth. No outlets, no lights, No projection systems. They were labeled in faded white print: main power ventilation, all relay lower hatch, main vault. She stepped back. Vault? Ellie pulled off her gloves and wiped sweat from her brow. The booth was warm despite the cold concrete. The kind of warmth that felt trapped, like it hadn't been let out in decades. Carefully, she flipped the first switch. Click. Nothing. Second switch. Click. Still nothing. The third gave a slight hum, like something far away had exhaled. And then, when she reached the fourth switch, lower hatch, she hesitated. Just for a second. Then she flipped it. The floor vibrated. Faintly. A sound like hydraulics groaned somewhere beneath her boots. She turned off the flashlight and listened. The vibrations stopped after a few seconds, but the silence that followed felt deeper, heavier. She ran outside. Back across the cracked lot, weeds crunching under her boots, toward the place where the panel had been. The steel door was open. Not wide, maybe 4 inches, but enough to see the edge of a ladder descending into darkness. Ellie dropped to her knees and angled her flashlight downward. The light hit stairs, then concrete, walls, then air. A chamber beneath the projection booth, untouched. Dust particles floated up, like they were escaping. She caught the scent of metal, and something older, sealed time. Her fingers trembled around the flashlight. The government panel. The buried hatch. The vault label. This wasn't just a Cold War storm shelter. This was planned. Hidden. Operational. Someone spent money and secrets building something here, and for some reason, they buried it under a movie screen and walked away. Ellie stood slowly. She'd bought the land to rebuild her life. But what she'd actually bought might have been someone else's unfinished mission. Ellie returned the next morning with backup: a crowbar, 2 headlamps, and an old mechanic's creeper strapped to the back of her truck. Her boots were laced tight, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, and her hair tied back in a fraying red bandana that had once belonged to her mother. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, not because she wanted to be secretive, but because, deep down, she didn't think anyone would believe her. The hatch had shifted more overnight, maybe from the vibrations, maybe from something else. The rusted hinges creaked like they were waking up from a coma. With a little more leverage and a grunt of effort, she forced it fully open. A wave of stale air rose to meet her, metallic, earthy, with a hint of long-dead electronics. The ladder stretched down maybe 15 feet into a square shaft, lined with smooth, seamless concrete. No rebar showing. No water damage. It looked almost new. Ellie clipped on her headlamp and started down, one step at a time, boots echoing softly in the shaft. Her breath fogged faintly in the cooler air as she descended. When her foot hit the bottom, she turned in a slow circle. The chamber was bigger than she expected. Roughly the size of a 2-car garage, with ceilings tall enough to stand. The walls were reinforced concrete, not poured, but molded. Seamless. There were recessed lighting fixtures in the ceiling, though none were lit, and an old control box near the far wall. But what caught her attention wasn't the architecture. It was the sound. When she shifted her weight, her boots scraped the floor and the echo came back strange. Not like hard concrete, but hollow, like the floor was floating on something else. She crouched and tapped the ground with her flashlight. Thump, thump, again, thump. Then, near the far right corner, the tone changed deeper, more muted. She knelt, heart thudding now, and ran her fingers across the seam. Just barely visible under decades of dust and grime was a trap door, set flush into the floor. There was no handle, no lock, just a circular groove in the center, like a hand-sized depression meant to be turned. She pressed into it. Nothing moved. Ellie leaned back, sitting in the silence. Above her, the world continued: wind in the grass, a distant motorcycle passing on the highway, the creak of the drive-in's rusted screen. But down here, it was different. Still, contained. It didn't feel like a forgotten shelter. It felt like a decision had been made here. Not to protect, but to hide. Ellie didn't have answers yet. Just the pounding sense that whatever was under her feet wasn't supposed to be found, not by someone like her, not by anyone at all. But she'd already come this far. And something in the walls, in the way the air pressed in, told her this was just the beginning. Ellie had cracked open enough rusted engines in her life to know when something was built not just to last but to outlive. The trapdoor beneath the bunker's concrete floor was one of those things. She crouched over the hand-sized depression in the center of the slab, tracing the circular groove again with the edge of her glove. No hinge, no visible mechanism. But there was movement, a tiny give, just enough to suggest something mechanical under the surface. Not electronics. Not now. This was Cold War era. Analog. Industrial. The kind of design meant to stay sealed until someone very specific came looking, which meant Ellie had no business even touching it. She touched it anyway. Back up in the booth, she went after the black control panel again, this time removing the entire faceplate. It was heavier than it looked. Wires spilled out like veins, brittle with age. Most were dead, but one small connection still blinked faintly with residual power, likely running off a buried backup cell or solar loop. And behind the bundle, she saw it. A brass tag, riveted to the inside wall of the panel. A 14607 divided by auth code, 7462 divided by issued. Jan 1962. She froze. It looked like a serial number at first, but something about the formatting, the symmetry stuck with her. Her mechanic brain saw codes the way others saw blueprints. 4 digits, no letters. Stamped into metal, not printed. It wasn't for ID. It was meant to be used. She climbed back down into the bunker, before she could overthink it. The groove in the trapdoor felt colder now, maybe just the damp air, or maybe nerves. She pressed her fingers into the depression again, and rotated clockwise. Nothing. Then she tried inputting the code, 1 digit at a time, turning the groove like a safe dial. 7 clicks. Pause. 4 clicks. Pause. 6. 2. On the final turn, something deep beneath the floor shifted. A metallic click echoed up from below. Then a second. A third. The trapdoor hissed. Dust shuddered into the air as ancient hydraulics groaned beneath the slab. The center panel slowly lifted, just an inch, and slid to the side. Inside, a set of concrete stairs descended into a deeper chamber, this one completely dark, untouched by sun, air, or time. Ellie pulled on her headlamp and stared down. The beam hit rows of stacked crates. Metal. Uniform. Some were bolted shut. Others had the faint glint of government markings, property of U.S. Treasury emergency. Use only authorized handlers. Classified. Ellie backed up, breath caught in her throat. She wasn't just inside a fallout shelter. This was a vault, hidden under decades of asphalt and forgotten film reels. And she just opened it. With a code stamped 6 decades ago, probably meant for someone else entirely. The air got colder with every step. Ellie's boots echoed softly down the stairwell as she descended into the vault, headlamp casting long shadows across the concrete walls. It smelled like iron and dust, but not the usual kind. Not rot. Not mold. This was the sterile scent of machinery left dormant, like an operating room sealed and abandoned. The stairwell ended at a blast door, thicker than any she'd ever seen, lined with reinforced steel and stamped with flaking red letters. U.S. Treasury Contingency Site, #4 Access Restricted Vertical Bar, Protocol, 101A. It hung slightly open. Whoever had locked this place hadn't locked it completely. Ellie squeezed through the narrow opening, heart thudding loud enough to drown out her footsteps. The room beyond was massive, a buried hangar beneath a forgotten theater. Low-slung ceiling lights lined the chamber in rows, powered down but intact. Rows of metal crates sat stacked on steel shelving, numbered and tagged. The air felt unmoved in decades. She walked slowly, deliberately, flashlight scanning over the boxes. The first crate was bolted shut, but the second was partially ajar, the top panel crooked, as if someone had opened it long ago and then thought better of closing it fully. Ellie took a breath. She braced herself for old paperwork, for broken equipment, maybe weapons, some kind of Cold War backup supply cache. But when she pulled the lid the rest of the way open, what greeted her wasn't files or fuel cells. It was gold. Dozens of heavy bars, stacked in perfect order. Each one stamped. U.S. Treasury Debt. Bullion. 999.9. Serial number 0546. A vertical bar 1000. 961. Her breath caught. She reached in, slowly, wrapping her gloved hands around the edge of one bar. It was heavy, sickly heavy in a way that felt wrong, impossible, real, the kind of weight that could change lives, or end them. She set it down on the concrete floor and just stared. 1 bar. At least 25 pounds. She counted again 12 bars in this crate alone. And that was just one crate of what looked like dozens. Her knees hit the floor without realizing it. The numbers began calculating in her head the worth, the weight, the sheer insanity of what she was looking at. This wasn't a relic. It wasn't emergency food rations or decommissioned gear. It was a fortune, untouched, unclaimed, hidden in plain sight. Ellie swallowed hard, her pulse hammering. She'd bought the Starlight Drive-In for $12,000 cash and a dream of rebuilding something. Instead, she'd found a Cold War vault buried beneath popcorn stains and cracked asphalt, and inside it, millions in government-marked gold. But before she could even process what it meant, she noticed something else. Sitting atop the next unopened crate, dusty and square, was a notebook. Black cover, weathered spine, a page corner folded halfway down. No title, no lock, just a post-it note stuck to the front. If you found this, stop reading. Turn back, please. Ellie stared at the note on the notebook for a long time. Not the words, exactly, but the handwriting. It was old, sure, but rushed, jagged, slightly tilted. Like whoever wrote it had done so quickly, under pressure, or fear. The kind of fear that made your hands shake, but not enough to stop you. The yellow paper was brittle and curling at the corners, and the adhesive had long since failed. It clung only by habit now. If you found this, stop reading. Turn back. Please. She didn't. The notebook's cover creaked as she opened it. Inside were pages, dozens of them filled with tight, blocky handwriting, all capital letters. The first entry was dated the 6th of April, 1962. The ink had faded, but not beyond legibility. Delivery confirmed. Operation Marigold fully transitioned underground. 12 units secured. No civilian crossover. Asset code matches manifest. Ellie frowned. There was no title, no full names, just references to the asset, vault integrity, and something repeatedly abbreviated as AOE4. She flipped forward. Crate 6 reclassified per Treasury Directive. Gold repurposed from Foreign Reserve Program. Do not list under inventory. Secure under fallback clearance. The next few pages detailed procedures, signatures, shift logs, and warnings. Mentions of civilian breach contingencies, unauthorized relocation protocols, and something underlined several times: never initiate transport above ground. Loss of control equals OPSEC violation. Ellie's stomach twisted. She looked back at the crates, then down at the bar she'd pulled out. The numbers stamped into its edge, the flawless shine, the unmistakable weight. It was real. And now she knew what it wasn't. It wasn't emergency currency. It wasn't backup funding. It wasn't for survival. It was hidden, intentionally, quietly, without paper trails. She stood slowly, the notebook still in hand, and walked further down the row. More crates, all marked with similar tags. The U.S. Treasury stamp again. Serial numbers that aligned with known bullion markings from the early 60s. Her father, an ex-steelworker turned conspiracy junkie, used to ramble about missing Federal Reserves during the Kennedy administration. Gold's not gone, he told her once, half drunk. It's sleeping, buried under bowling alleys and movie screens. She'd laughed. She wasn't laughing now. At the end of the row was a smaller container square, heavier looking, with a different label: personal files, classified, destroy if breached. The lid wasn't sealed. Inside were envelopes, all rubber-banded, together. Ellie lifted the top one and blinked. The return address was faded but visible. A.E. Vaughn, U.S. Defense Logistics Division, Atlanta. Her throat tightened. That was her grandfather, the one who disappeared in 1973. The one no one talked about anymore. The one her mother had called a ghost with clearance. Ellie stared at the envelope in her hands. The gold was real. But now, the mystery was personal. This wasn't just about money. It was about blood. And whatever her grandfather had buried down here, he'd made sure it stayed hidden. Until now. Ellie sat on the cold concrete floor, the gold bar forgotten beside her. In her lap, The notebook lay open again, pages fluttering gently from the low, constant hum of air recirculation, faint, but definitely active. That was the strangest part. Even after decades underground, this place wasn't dead. It was preserved, breathing, waiting. She turned the notebook to the next page. The tone shifted. If you're reading this, you've already opened the hatch. That means something failed. The protocol, the silence. Or maybe I failed. This isn't just about gold. It never was. If you think this was a Fallout reserve, you're wrong. This was an off-ledger holding site, a ghost vault. Marigold was just a name, a story we told other agencies. What's down here is real. And it's dangerous not in the usual ways. Not because it explodes or poisons, because it makes people disappear. Ellie flipped to the next entry. If you're family, I'm sorry. I didn't want you to inherit this. I wanted it to stay buried until time itself forgot it. But if it's you, Ellie, and I hope it's not, then I'm breaking every rule they made me swear to. Her breath caught. She scanned the signature. Ellie Vaughn. It was him, her grandfather. She remembered the black and white photo, tucked into the edge of her mother's mirror, him in a pressed uniform, half smiling. One hand behind his back like he was hiding something even then. Everyone said he went rogue, that he walked off base one day and vanished without a trace. But now she understood why. He hadn't vanished. He'd been buried alive by secrets. Ellie stood, the notebook still in hand, and moved back toward the smaller crate marked personal files. Inside, beyond the envelopes, was a small black device, rectangular, about the size of a book, covered in rubber sheeting. There were no buttons, just one port. She recognized it, a military-grade data plug used for transferring files in the 1990 seconds. Near it, taped to the side of the crate, was a Polaroid, a grainy image of a younger version of her grandfather, standing in this very room next to these same crates. Behind him, a wall safe, slightly ajar. On the back of the photo, a note. Do not trust anyone from Aegis. If they find the gold, they'll assume you took the rest. They don't forgive. They don't forget. Bury it again, or run. Ellie's knees wobbled. She backed away slowly, eyes darting between the crates, the photo, and the notebook still shaking in her hands. Aegis. That name had been whispered in a few old files she'd seen during a stint doing maintenance at a decommissioned airbase. Always in footnotes. Always redacted. Whoever they were, they had built this. Or ordered it. Or worse, lost control of it. Ellie had come here to restore something forgotten. But now, she knew some things were buried on purpose. And some warnings weren't just for her. They were for whoever came next. Ellie stood in the vault's heavy silence, her breath clouding faintly in the cold underground air. The black device in her hand felt heavier than its size should have allowed, like it carried weight beyond circuitry. There were no screens, no switches, just that single data port. She stared at it for a long moment, before tucking it gently into the inside pocket of her jacket. Whatever was on that thing, she wasn't going to try opening it down here. Not when she still didn't know who, or what, might be listening. Back on the surface, the morning had just begun. Light filtered through the broken screen of the drive-in like a cracked lens. Ellie emerged from the hatch covered in dust, the notebook and Polaroid tucked tightly into her pack. She pushed the steel door shut behind her, sealing the trap door until the hydraulics hissed and clicked into place again. For now, that vault would stay quiet. She drove back into town with the windows down and the wind in her face, trying to convince herself this was still reality. At home, Ellie cleared off her kitchen table and laid everything out. The notebook, the photo, the envelope with her grandfather's name, and the flash drive. She didn't own any gear capable of reading the port, but she knew someone who might. Max Dyer had been her dad's best friend, a retired Navy radio tech, who now spent his days repairing ham radios and rebuilding vacuum tubes in his garage. He hadn't left the county in 15 years, but his mind never stopped traveling. Max was the kind of guy who had once tried to teach himself Morse code in his sleep by playing tapes under his pillow. He didn't ask questions when Ellie showed up unannounced, just raised an eyebrow when she placed the flash drive on his workbench. "Where'd you get this?" he asked. "Drive-in theater," she said. Max snorted. "You find it under the popcorn machine?" "Something like that." He squinted at the plug and shuffled over to an old military terminal the size of a mini-fridge. It was patched together with spare parts from 4 different decades, and still ran a stripped-down version of a DOS interface. He connected the drive with an adapter and keyed in a few commands. The screen went black. Then, a blinking cursor appeared. Access key required. Max frowned. Huh. That's not standard. You got a passphrase? Ellie opened the notebook again, flipping through the early entries. On page 6, circled in red pencil, was a single word. Crimson. She typed it in. The screen flickered. Files appeared. Titled folders. Encrypted images. Scanned documents. One stood out immediately. Operation Marigold. Final inventory. Max leaned back. Jesus, Ellie. This thing's real. She opened the file. There, line by line, were manifests of the vault contents. Crates of bullion, emergency cash, government bonds, but also 4 lines stamped red. Asset Package 4. Missing assigned handler. A.E. Vaughn last seen, December 1970. 3 status, classified. Presume compromised. Ellie stared at the screen, heart sinking. The gold was only part of the story. Whatever her grandfather had hidden down there, the real secret had disappeared. And she might have just triggered the alarm. Ellie didn't sleep that night. She sat at the edge of her kitchen table, staring at the screen of her old laptop, the notebook beside her, the flash drive still plugged into the clunky adapter. Her thoughts looped like bad wiring: the vault, the gold, her grandfather's name printed next to a red compromise stamp. She kept going back to the missing asset. Package 4. No description, no weight, no record of what it actually was. Just missing. Just gone. And then there was Aegis. She searched the name in every public-facing archive she could access: military, federal contracts, declassified Cold War documents. Nothing. Just a few scrubbed footnotes and Joint Task Force memos. Even the acronym changed. Sometimes it stood for Advanced Emergency Government Infrastructure Systems. Other times it wasn't defined at all. Whatever Aegis had been, it was never meant to be seen, so she tried a different approach. On an old secure forum she used back when she still repaired vintage avionics equipment, a digital backroom where defense techs, Cold War relic hunters, and half-retired spooks sometimes gathered, she posted a message. Looking for information on Operation Marigold or Treasury contingency sites, possibly connected to Aegis logistics. Anyone recognize these terms? She didn't expect a reply. Not right away. But 15 minutes later, someone answered. The username was Atlas Echo. I worked there. You shouldn't be asking. Her heart jolted. She responded cautiously. Worked where? Another reply came instantly. If you found the bunker, seal it again. Walk away. They'll come looking. Who? She typed. The ones who built it. The ones who lost control of it. If the asset is still missing, they'll assume you took it. They don't knock. They don't announce. They erase. She paused, then asked the one question she hadn't dared to until now. Was my grandfather one of them? No reply. 10 minutes passed. 20. Then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., another message. Vaughn was the last loyal one. That's why he ran. That's why they buried him in silence. You're not the first to go looking, but you might be the last. Then the thread vanished, deleted. The user account gone. Not banned, just never existed. Ellie leaned back in her chair, the room suddenly too quiet. Outside, the wind moved the branches, like someone pacing around her house. She unplugged the flash drive and killed the power to the laptop. No traces. Not tonight. Back in the vault, it had been easy to feel in control alone, surrounded by silence and steel and secrets. But now the world felt smaller, more watched. Ellie crossed to her front door and double-checked the deadbolt. Then, out of habit or instinct, she slid open the drawer by the entryway and grabbed her father's old revolver. It hadn't been fired in years, but she loaded it anyway. Not because she expected trouble, but because someone had already told her. They don't forgive, they don't forget. And someone somewhere knew she had opened the vault. The Black Mercury pulled in just after sunrise. Ellie spotted it through the cracked blinds of the old projection booth, which she had started using as a base while gutting the theater. It looked out of place, spotless. Late model, but without plates. The kind of car that doesn't belong in a town like hers. No rental stickers, no dealership frame. Just silent chrome and two men in black suits stepping out like they knew exactly where they were. They didn't knock. They walked the gravel lot like inspectors, slow and deliberate, taking mental notes. One carried a slim leather portfolio. The other held nothing at all, not even a phone. Ellie wiped her hands on a rag and stepped outside, squinting against the early light. "Morning," she called out casually, doing her best not to show anything behind her eyes. "You fellas here for a movie?" The taller one gave a polite smile. "Miss Vaughn?" Her stomach flipped. "Yeah." He reached into his jacket and produced a card. Plain white, no logo, no agency. Just a name. T. Laren, Infrastructure Compliance Division. "We're conducting a review of long-neglected federal surplus properties," he said smoothly. "The Starlight Drive Inn was once leased under the Civil Defense Entertainment Grant, part of the mid-century morale campaigns. You acquired the property recently?" She nodded slowly. "Paid cash. Got the deed from the county." "Of course," Laren replied. His partner scanned the perimeter silently. "We're interested in any unusual findings during your renovation," he continued. "Underground wiring, unmarked panels, sealed spaces, that sort of thing. Some of these sites were modified for emergency use during the Cold War. Safety hazard protocols, you understand." Ellie crossed her arms. "Didn't find much." She lied. "One busted fuse box, some dead rats, and a whole lot of popcorn kernels from 1978. Laren smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "If anything new turns up," he said, tucking the card back into his pocket, "you'll let us know." He didn't wait for an answer. They turned and walked the lot once more, slowly, then climbed back into the Mercury. No tire spin, no hurry, just silence. Ellie waited until they were out of sight, then sprinted for the hatch, down the ladder, through the vault, straight to the crates. She counted them twice. 3 were missing. Her breath caught like a wire in her throat. Nothing else was touched, not the files, not the flash drive, not the notebook, but the bars were gone, vanished without a trace. She hadn't told anyone where she'd stored them, except Max. But Max was loyal. He wouldn't have said a word. She scanned the floor and found a footprint in the dust. Not hers, not boot tread. Something smooth-soled. "Professional." Near the vault wall, a single word had been sprayed in red stencil paint. "Traitor." Ellie stepped back. The men in the Mercury hadn't been asking questions. They'd been delivering a warning. And next time, they wouldn't knock. Ellie didn't go home that night. She stayed in the drive-in's old projection booth, curled in a sleeping bag beneath the empty film reels and the broken window. Every creak in the concrete made her tense. Every gust of wind felt like footsteps on gravel. She didn't sleep. Not really, just kept her hand close to the revolver resting under the edge of her blanket, her ears tuned to silence. By morning, her mind was clear, in the way only exhaustion can make it. There were no more maybes. No what-ifs. She had found something that was never meant to be found. And now, someone knew she had it. Or at least, they thought she did. The next few hours were methodical. Controlled. Mechanic mode. She stripped the rest of the gold from the vault, what hadn't been taken, and moved it piece by piece, wrapped in welding blankets, hidden beneath tool crates and car parts in the bed of her truck. Then, she opened the crawl space beneath her new shop, the old concession stand building, still half collapsed, but dry underneath, and started digging. 3 feet down, she hit an old drainage pipe, long disused. She rerouted it with scrap steel, and turned it into a false wall. By nightfall, the remaining gold was hidden inside. Sealed behind bricks, she cemented herself, mortar still drying when she finally sat down. The revolver was back in her waistband. The notebook was tucked into the floorboard. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. But her hands were stained with dust and concrete and secrets, and they wouldn't stop twitching. The choices played over in her head like a looped tape. Report it? Not a chance. You don't report something to the people who leave traitor painted on your wall. Keep it? Also risky. Gold that deep underground, with no record, doesn't just disappear. Someone, somewhere, would always be looking. Sell it? That would take her into black markets and offshore transfers and more exposure than she could afford. One mistake, one loose thread, and she'd vanish just like her grandfather. That left one option. Wait, watch, and outlast. Ellie stared at the hatch from across the lot. The men in the Mercury hadn't come back. Not yet. But they would. She could feel it in her bones. And when they did, she needed them to believe she had nothing left. Nothing worth taking. Nothing worth hurting. So she patched the projection booth, covered the panel, filled the trench where the hatch sat with gravel, sealed and disguised beneath a cracked soda machine she dragged across the lot. She buried the access point, buried the truth. Then she made coffee, and sat outside her shop as if nothing had changed. But everything had. What started as a renovation had become a war for silence and legacy. And in that crawl space beneath her boots, under bricks and bone-tired hands, sat millions in forgotten gold, and the last secret she'd ever inherit. The envelope wasn't buried. It wasn't locked, sealed, or hidden in a coded box like the flash drive or gold crates. It was just there, taped behind the fuse panel in the old concession stand, yellowed and brittle, fluttering faintly when she opened the breaker door to reroute the shop's power. Her hand froze before she even touched it. Across the front, written in careful block letters that looked just like the notebook pages, were 4 words. 4E. Vaughn, only. Ellie pulled it free slowly, as if it might disintegrate in her fingers. The seal was still intact. The paper felt heavier than it should, the kind of weight that came from words that should never be spoken out loud. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she sat down on the old cooler near the entrance, the late afternoon sun casting long lines through the broken screen behind her. She listened to the breeze, the sound of rustling weeds, the quiet creak of her shop settling with age. Then she peeled the seal open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, filled front and back in steady, deliberate handwriting. It began simply, "If this letter has reached you, I have failed, but that means you're smarter than I was, or at least braver. My name is Abraham Elijah Vaughn. I am your grandfather." Her chest tightened. She'd never heard him called by his full name. Her mother rarely mentioned him at all, only once or twice, when Ellie was a kid, in moments of whiskey-fueled honesty. The letter continued. "They will come for you, not because you're dangerous, because you've seen something that contradicts their version of history. That vault, the gold, it wasn't supposed to survive. But I knew it would. Operation Marigold was a shell. The gold was real, but the objective wasn't currency. It was disappearance. Funds used to buy silence. To erase those who learned too much. We weren't protecting America. We were unmaking it, piece by piece. I walked away in 1973. Not to escape, but to bury what I could before the rest vanished. I couldn't save everything, and I couldn't save myself." There was a pause in the flow of ink, a long gap between thoughts. Then, "Ellie, if this reaches you, you must understand something. You were never meant to carry this. But if you've found it, then the only person I trust with the truth is you. Don't trade it for money. Don't run from it in fear. The gold is nothing compared to the map." She blinked. "What map?" The letter ended with one final sentence, underlined 3 times. "The others are still out there. I couldn't get to them. But you can." Her hands trembled. She looked back toward the trapdoor she'd buried under the rusted soda machine. There were more vaults, more buried pasts, more secrets still sleeping. And now she had the key to all of them. The envelope wasn't buried. It wasn't locked, sealed, or hidden in a coded box like the flash drive or gold crates. It was just there, taped behind the fuse panel in the old concession stand, yellowed and brittle, fluttering faintly when she opened the breaker door to reroute the shop's power. Her hand froze before she even touched it. Across the front, written in careful block letters that looked just like the notebook pages, were 4 words. 4E. Vaughn, only. Ellie pulled it free slowly, as if it might disintegrate in her fingers. The seal was still intact. The paper felt heavier than it should, the kind of weight that came from words that should never be spoken out loud. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she sat down on the old cooler near the entrance, the late afternoon sun casting long lines through the broken screen behind her. She listened to the breeze, the sound of rustling weeds, the quiet creak of her shop settling with age. Then she peeled the seal open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, filled front and back in steady, deliberate handwriting. It began simply, "If this letter has reached you, I have failed. But that means you're smarter than I was, or at least braver. My name is Abraham Elijah Vaughn. I am your grandfather. Her chest tightened. She'd never heard him called by his full name. Her mother rarely mentioned him at all, only once or twice when Ellie was a kid, in moments of whiskey-fueled honesty. The letter continued. They will come for you. Not because you're dangerous, because you've seen something that contradicts their version of history. That vault, the gold, it wasn't supposed to survive, but I knew it would. Operation Marigold was a shell. The gold was real, but the objective wasn't currency. It was disappearance. Funds used to buy silence. To erase those who learned too much. We weren't protecting America. We were unmaking it, piece by piece. I walked away in 1973, not to escape, but to bury what I could before the rest vanished. I couldn't save everything, and I couldn't save myself. There was a pause in the flow of ink, a long gap between thoughts. Then, Ellie, if this reaches you, you must understand something. You were never meant to carry this. But if you've found it, then the only person I trust with the truth is you. Don't trade it for money. Don't run from it in fear. The gold is nothing compared to the map. She blinked. What map? The letter ended with one final sentence, underlined 3 times. The others are still out there. I couldn't get to them, but you can. Her hands trembled. She looked back toward the trapdoor she'd buried under the rusted soda machine. There were more vaults, more buried pasts, more secrets still sleeping. And now she had the key to all of them. Ellie unfolded the second sheet tucked behind the letter. At first, she thought it was just an old schematic, faded lines, colored sections, and rows of tiny numbers printed in government typeface. But, when she turned it sideways, the shape revealed itself. It was a map, not a road map, not geological, but something stranger. A web of interconnected points across the continental U.S. Thin red lines snaked from one location to the next, each labeled with an alphanumeric code. Some were in the middle of nowhere. Others sat just outside major cities. And every single one shared the same note in the bottom corner. ALS Contingency Sites Asset Lockdown System Access. Level Omega 4. Only Ellie's breath caught. ALS. She'd seen that abbreviation once before on the flash drive, buried deep in a folder she hadn't opened yet. Her fingers had skimmed past it, thinking it referred to a power supply designation. Now she knew better. She laid the letter beside the map and studied the connections. 1 site in Utah, 2 in Texas, 1 just outside a place she recognized in South Dakota, a decommissioned missile silo her father had once joked about while fixing a retired bomber engine. But what made her blood run cold was the mark in Georgia, her home state. Just a red dot. Site A 4-113. Latitude and longitude coordinates scribbled faintly in pencil. It sat less than 40 miles from the drive-in. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the flash drive and loaded it into her laptop. She opened the folder marked ALS, mapping, expecting code instead. It held scans of flight paths, cargo manifests, decrypted memos, and field notes, all tied to the movement of classified asset holdings, from 1,950, through 1,974. And in one scanned memo, stamped confidential, was this line. Due to breach risk in a 4-113, reroute package 4 to temporary storage at Site A4092 Starlight Theater, GA. Ellie's heart slammed against her ribs. She'd found it. She had been standing on Site A4092 for months. And package 4, the one still marked missing in every database, had never been stolen. It had simply been moved, temporarily, until her grandfather walked away and sealed it himself. But if this map was real, then Starlight wasn't the only place where things had been buried. And if the others were still intact, if they'd been sealed with the same kind of secrecy, then what she'd found might only be one piece of something much bigger. Ellie looked at the Georgia coordinates again. A place called Dawson Ridge. She recognized the name. An old grain elevator compound now fenced off for soil contamination, or so the county claimed. The world above had kept moving, but something under it had stayed frozen in place, waiting. And now, for the first time in 50 years, someone was looking again. She didn't know what was waiting under Site A4-113, but she knew this. The road wasn't ending. It was opening. It was past midnight When Ellie returned to the drive, the gravel crunched louder than usual under her tires, maybe because she knew what she was driving toward, or maybe because her ears had started tuning out the rest of the world. Everything had narrowed since finding the map. Since realizing her grandfather hadn't just hidden something, he'd left her a trail. She parked in the shadows, headlights off, and walked across the lot with her flashlight low. The wind had picked up. Leaves tumbled across the broken pavement like whispers. Something about the air felt wrong still, but expectant, like the moment before a thunderclap. She knelt in front of the old soda machine covering the hatch, shoved aside the gravel she'd used to disguise the edges, and froze. The steel was exposed, and the hatch was open. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't opened it in days. No one else was supposed to know it was there. She reached for her flashlight with a trembling hand and angled it downward. The ladder stretched into darkness, undisturbed. But the silence felt off, the kind of silence that came after movement, after things had been touched and taken. She climbed down one step at a time, revolver strapped to her hip, heart hammering like a piston in her chest. The vault's heavy air hit her immediately. Dust stirred in small spirals where her boots landed. Her light swept across the crates, and her breath caught. They were open. Not just the ones she'd left ajar, all of them. Lids removed, contents gone. Not scattered. Removed. She ran to the far wall, to the small crate that had once held the notebook, the photos, the letter with her grandfather's name. Empty. Files taken. Flash drive gone. Even the Polaroid of Abraham Vaughn had vanished. The faint outline of tape all that remained on the inside of the lid. Her knees buckled. She staggered back against the concrete, the revolver cold against her thigh, breath coming in shallow gasps. There was no sign of a struggle, no forced entry, just absence. And then she saw it. Sprayed across the far wall, the same red stencil as before, only larger now, cleaner, centered like a headline. "We let you find it." Her mouth went dry. They hadn't missed the vault. They had been waiting, letting her unlock it, letting her gather the pieces, letting her chase the map, while they followed her. She'd been the unwitting key. Ellie backed away slowly, light trembling in her grip. Whatever Aegis was, they weren't just trying to recover lost property. They were running an operation. One still alive, one watching, and she'd just completed step one for them. She climbed the ladder in a daze, heart numb, mind racing. Back on the surface, the wind howled louder than before. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine started. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it. They weren't trying to stop her. Not yet. They were letting her lead. And now that she had the map, they were ready to follow. The sky over Glenridge was cloudless by morning, crisp, sharp, and blue, in a way that almost felt artificial. Ellie didn't remember sleeping, though her body said otherwise. She'd driven through the night. No destination, headlights carving open back roads until fuel and fear ran dry. She was parked now behind Max's garage, the only place she still trusted. The old man had been up for hours, soldering a vacuum tube when she walked in without a word, her eyes sunken and jaw tight. "You look like hell," he muttered, not unkindly. Ellie dropped the folded map on his workbench. "They breached the vault," she said. Max stopped what he was doing, slowly took off his glasses, and stared at the paper. "They took it?" he asked. She nodded. "Everything." Max studied the markings, the web of dots, the route that stretched far beyond the county line. Then he tapped the spot she'd already memorized. "Dawson Ridge," he said. Ellie said nothing. He sighed. "You're going, aren't you?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I have to." Max glanced behind her, toward the battered duffel she'd dropped by the door. He could see the outlines, flashlight, the revolver, the notebook, and tucked deep inside, a piece of equipment they hadn't touched in years. A shortwave radio salvaged from a Vietnam-era field kit. He walked to a back cabinet and pulled out a thin metal case, dusted it off, and handed it to her. "Signal booster," he said. "If they're still using analog fallback frequencies, it might get you in range." Ellie took it and left without another word. Dawson Ridge was a ghost. An overgrown property hemmed in by rusted barbed wire and weather-warped warning signs. Seoul. Contamination. No entry. Federal property. The grain silos still stood, leaning like tombstones. But the ground had long since reclaimed the roads. Ellie parked at the edge of the tree line and followed the coordinates on foot. The wind was quiet. The world still. Near the southern silo, buried beneath ivy and gravel, she found the spot. A concrete hatch, identical to the one at the drive-in. The keypad was shattered, wires gutted. Someone had been here recently. She set down the booster, connected it to the radio, and turned the dial slowly through static and hiss, sweeping low-frequency ranges the military hadn't used publicly in decades. Nothing. And then a ping. A slow, repeating signal. Not code. Not automated. Live. She keyed the mic. "This is Ellie Vaughn. If anyone's listening, I know what you took. I have the map, and I know what my grandfather tried to stop." For a moment, silence. Then a crackle. A voice came through mail, tired, but clear. "You found it. The others have not. You decide what happens next." Ellie sat back, the weight of the words like concrete on her chest. This wasn't about recovering the past anymore. It was about controlling the future, and she was no longer the one searching. Now, everyone was listening. The new shop opened quietly. No grand announcements, no ribbon cuttings. Just a hand-painted sign over the concession stand's refurbished garage doors that read, "Vaughn Auto and Restoration Est. 2025. Built from the ground up." Locals came by out of curiosity. At first mostly older folks who remembered the drive-in from when it played double features and sold popcorn for 50 cents. They asked questions. Ellie kept her answers simple. "Just restoring what I can," she'd say with a tired smile. "One piece at a time." No one ever asked about the vault. No one ever mentioned the cars that had circled the lot late at night in the weeks prior, or the strangers in suits spotted near the tree line just once before vanishing for good. Small towns knew how to keep secrets when they realized some questions didn't have safe answers. The gold. What was left of it stayed buried in the crawlspace beneath the shop's foundation, hidden behind the false wall she'd built with her own 2 hands. She left one bar out, polished until it caught the sun, and mounted it above the front desk in a reclaimed display case. To anyone else, it looked like a clever replica, a novelty. But Ellie knew better. It was the one thing they hadn't taken, the one she refused to give back. Not because of greed, not because of pride, because it reminded her that truth can be heavy, untouchable, and still yours to carry. Max stopped by on Saturdays. They didn't talk much about the vault anymore. That part of the story was finished. Or maybe just dormant. Occasionally, he'd ask about the map. "You think the other sites are still active?" Ellie would shrug. "I think they're waiting." But she didn't chase them. Not now. She had learned something in the aftermath, in the silence that followed the voice on the radio. You don't have to dig up every secret to be free from it. Sometimes, surviving what you uncover is the braver act. She hung her grandfather's notebook in a shadow box on the shop's back wall, beside an old photo of a younger Ellie, grease on her cheek, holding a wrench too big for her hands. And beneath that, the final page of his letter. Some gold was never meant for banks or bombs. Some is meant to test you. Some is meant to find the right hands. If you're reading this, I think it did. In time, Vaughn Auto became more than a shop. It became a story whispered between toolboxes, passed around like folklore, about the mechanic girl who rebuilt something no one else could even see. Not a car, not a vault, not just a legacy, but a path forward forged in silence, lit by the smallest truths she dared to keep, and buried, always, just beneath the rust.